can't believe this house is teeming with guns. Guns kill.
Oh, guns kill. Is that right? Well, let's see about that. Okay, gun, kill. Go ahead, kill someone. Don't be shy. See? Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Guns defend people against people with smaller guns.
Thanks for your attention. This concludes my elaborations. No, dear viewer, let's put the jokes aside mostly for a moment. In today's episode, we will be discussing weapons, rights, crime and prevention, as well as politicians' understanding, or lack thereof, surrounding these issues. I apologize for the delay regarding the opportunity costs, why I deeply value each of your views, Maskirovka and 5th generation of warfare episodes, and many more, but as the German government is once more seeking to indulge in opportunistic actionism, while actually making the problems worse, I just had to weigh in on this issue, and as I am quoting many US-American bureaus and address the gun culture in comparison, I thought it was only natural to throw some argumentative ammo as well, while also giving an insight on European regulations. I promise, if you are a US citizen, except for maybe Californian, you might feel really good at the end of this video. Well, already after 2 minutes in probably. And to hopefully prevent such...
You're such a fascist.
Peace pusher!
Murderer!
Hermaphrodite!
Stand!
I'm swinging wild, Francine!
kinds of discourse in the comment section are not upfront. The speaker's expertise bases on paragraph 15, section 5 of the German Federal Hunting Act, Hunter's License Exam, expertise certification under paragraph 7 of the German Weapons Act for sport shooters, both including gun-specific legal, written, oral and practical exams, including proof of mandatory shooting accuracy. Further, paragraph 27, section 2(c) of the Soldier Career Regulation, or paragraph 24, section 2, sentence 1, military officer exam, with some years in the German Armed Forces, attaining an officer's license, and a few years more in private military contracting, including evacuation assistance from Ukraine in 2022, as well as research and development support work in small arms and tactical gear. See our Tech and Practical channel, where we will republish impressions from the EVA and Disaster Expo by the end of the year, featuring Military Arms channel, Polymer Tactical, as well as Forgotten Weapons. While you further can find a lot of sources linked in the description. Now let's briefly review the latest proposal, the current state of gun laws under the Weapons Act for civilians, and the misuse of these, followed by a detour into the gun and crime culture of the USA to prevent certain whataboutisms. See our video on all propaganda techniques, while we close out with illustrating the concept of security theater, using the TSA for a practical example. Finally, we will wrap up with practical insights and sharp words on the illusionary weapons or gun-free zones concept. Welcome, dear viewer, here at Stratagems. After the tragic events in Mannheim, Solingen and München and many more, politicians are once again unable to resist the urge to take minimal actual action to achieve the maximum effect in terms of calming the regardingly non-professional public, loudly discussing yet another tightening of weapons laws. Yet, in the end, this all boils down to one thing: to reduce the population's capacity to defend itself. Senkung der Wehrfähigkeit der Bevölkerung. Among other things, politicians promise to improve public safety by expanding so-called weapons-free zones, or at least suggest to the public that they are generally working toward progress, while themselves enjoying the privilege of personal arm protection. The basic fact of these zones yet, however, is laughably by the premise itself, because criminals will not suddenly start obeying gun laws, let alone those specific zones.
Oh boy, you don't know what I am. Yeah, I'm a gun-free zone.
The casual headshot in broad daylight at Frankfurt main station clearly disproved that notion. All these zones do is to disarm law-abiding citizens, creating a dangerous illusion of false security, while signaling criminals where minimal resistance will be assured. General suspicions, so loudly condemned, have long been applied without hesitation to legal gun owners, and now apparently to the average citizen as well. Now let's take a look at lawful gun owners, those who have long complied with ever-increasing restrictions, while terrorists and criminals typically operate with illegal, often fully automatic, military-grade weapons and explosives that are already banned, yes, even in the US. So what are the requirements for, say, a hunter who enjoys the most gun-related freedoms in Germany, and how much danger does he suddenly pose to society? Is he likely to brandish his weapon to back up his arguments, or randomly start shooting if he does not like the funny looks you are giving him? Probably not, because if you should happen to know a German hunter with a firearm, he's at least 18 years old, his criminal record, certificate of good conduct has been thoroughly checked and is clean, He has not committed any infractions or drunk driving offenses. He's mentally sound and fully self-determination capable to oversee his own legal business. He had to pass written, oral, and practical exams covering laws, technology, and handling. He attended at least 120 hours of training and provided proof to the authorities. Before acquiring a firearm, he had to purchase a certified safe and provide documentation to authorities. He had to purchase another secured, lockable metal cabinet for ammunition storage. He must ensure that only he has access to weapons and ammunition. He also had to show proof of liability insurance worth millions of damages. He must always have a hunting license and he regularly every 2 years. His own defense. Each time he is renewed, he undergoes another background check. By the time he is allowed to purchase a hunting rifle, he has already spent over 2,000 euros in exams and permits. So every weapon he owns is registered with serial numbers and needs access to the authorities nationwide. If he registers the weapon is used in a crime, forensic analysis, registration records, and matching the caliber to the weapon owners will practically guarantee the identification of the perpetrator. He must stay out of legal trouble or avoid health issues. Otherwise, he will have to surrender his weapons and starting firearms for religious overnight. His right to the inviolability of his home safe, as he can be visited without notice at any time, and must allow him to check the storage of his weapons and ammunition. In some states, he must pay an audaciously high fee for each such visit. Should he be convicted of a minor offense involving a few daily fines or be caught transporting a firearm of a level of 0.1, he will lose all of his religious overnight as well. So, if your neighbor is a hunter or sport shooter, you can be sure that you are living next to one of the most thoroughly vetted, law-abiding and responsible citizens in Germany. Continuing. Since these days, it is quite trendy to bring up the word Nazis at least once when discussing such topics. It is worth mentioning that, like many other laws, for example the Imperial Kriegsmarine still thanks German citizens for the temporary increase of the champagne tax. The gun laws we have today also stem, surprise, from Nazi-era legislation, which, hopefully no shock here, could be described as at least problematically motivated as well as formulated. During the March Revolution of 1848, many citizens in Germany demanded the arming of the people, which was included in the Prussian constitution draft on July 26th. However, a proposal from a group of deputies in the Frankfurt National Assembly to include an explicit right to bear arms, every German has the right to be armed and gun rights and military service shall be equal for all, was rejected. This was partly due to conservative opposition and partly because liberals felt that this right was already implied in the provisions for mandatory military service and civil defense. These traditions of citizen militias continue partly since almost 1,000 years today in many shooting guilds and are prominently represented in cultural parades. The Nazis in turn took advantage of the fact that after World War I, the Allies imposed the introduction of a gun law, effectively turning the right to bear arms into a privilege. What the brown shirts especially exploited were vague terms like reliability and personal suitability. At first glance, these terms sound reasonable and honorably motivated, but they can be so broadly interpreted by local officials that it became easy to label homosexuals, Jews, and today anyone inconvenient as unreliable or unsuitable, thus disarming them, a practice which the current German Interior Minister Faeser now seeks to simplify even further. When we look at the statistics on the misuse of legal firearms and violent crime, one thing becomes immediately clear. Such incidents account for a vanishingly small portion of the already relatively few gun-related violent crimes. In fact, these occurrences are often statistically insignificant, especially when considering some of the figures from Berlin, with 0 to 2 cases of any misuse of legal firearms over the span of almost a decade. Curiously, in the UK, the number of homicides with handguns increased after handguns were widely banned following a school shooting. The good citizen and well-meaning politician might tear their hair out and ask, how can that be? Well, it may be a bold hypothesis, but could it be that criminals don't even adhere to gun laws? Shocking. And before anyone accuses me of longing for US-American conditions, let's briefly have a look at these. You've probably heard the so often cited figure of tens of thousands of gun deaths in the US each year. What you may not have heard is that several hundreds of these deaths are accidents and the majority are suicides. Moreover, you have probably rarely or never heard that there are at least 108 to as many as 500,000 or even 2.5 to 3 million successful legal defense cases involving firearms each year. So, the issue at hand is more about underlying violent crime stemming from crisis in wealth distribution, mental health and drug addiction, as over half of deaths are suicides and therefore as well as overdoses, so-called deaths of despair, how it is presented, and a lack of proper knowledge, which mandatory proof I would fully support. The right to self-defense is a natural right, but as the many accidents in the USA show, congratulations, you are 18, pick whatever you want, 500 rounds of ammo for first-time buyers, have fun, is explicitly not what I would endorse, and at least basic background checks on violent felonies and especially proven domestic violence could certainly be an improvement there. Now let's examine the stated goals of the EU and German governments. Preventing gun crime and terrorist attacks. Looking at Charlie Hebdo and Bataclan, which prompted the last EU gun law revision, these attacks were carried out, surprise, with illegal fully automatic military-grade weapons or illegally modified easily available models. So, if anyone claims that widespread legal gun ownership is the issue, they not only discredit the most thoroughly vetted and law-abiding citizens, but also show an unwillingness to engage rationally with the topic. Or, more often than not, they have an agenda beyond the noble cause they claim to champion.
We will now vote on the flags for orphans and airline rerouting bill. Oh well, it's paper-clipped. Chairman Hayes, any objections?
To hopefully wrap this up, there are currently several million firearms and hundreds of millions, if not billions, of rounds of ammunition privately owned in Germany. Believe me, if this were a problem, you would know about it by now. The Swiss, for instance, have a firearm for every fourth citizen and, to my knowledge, do not regularly experience school shootings, executions over perceived slights to honor, or any recent attempts to annex anyone's territory on the scoreboard. Although honestly, if they did, I might not be too opposed to this Anschluss. Knowing from first hand the tax rates would be awesome. What the Swiss did, however, was efficiently practice closing their borders in 2015 in preparation to potential intra-European refugee flows. Anyway, disarming the law-abiding citizen, as demonstrated by the extensive verification of reliability and the virtually non-existent misuse of firearms in violent crimes, can only stem from ignorance, bias, or plain malice. After all, in Chinese, the words for crisis and opportunity share the same symbol. The EU's ban on larger, often standard magazines with more than 10 rounds for rifles only would make sense in one scenario, if one feared a future conflict with these law-abiding citizens. Otherwise, as already outlined, this merely gives terrorists, who don't adhere to magazine restrictions either, an advantage over potential first responders, who would now have to reload more frequently in a firefight, putting them at a significant tactical disadvantage. Such first responders are such who saved entire communities in Israel last year, sometimes single-handedly, prompting the previously strict country to immediately pass a gun law reform aimed at liberalization. Taken for themselves, weapons are nothing more than tools, which can be used for good or for evil. Unfortunately, tools are not just weapons or often murder instruments. For instance, hammers kill more people in the USA than the so-called assault rifles each year. Regardless of the weapon, however, the disarmament of law-abiding citizens is nothing less than reducing the ability of the overall population to defend themselves, placing them under general suspicion, disempowering them, and accepting the very high likeliness of more innocent victims. Let's summarize. First, expecting criminals to obey gun laws of all things shows either massive naivety or a lack of true intent to actually solve problems. Second, additional bureaucracy and the harassment of legal gun owners and, for example, tradesmen who always carry certain tools like knives will unnecessarily tie up further state resources and negatively impact public safety on top. Third, even the FBI recognizes the contribution of civilian first responders, as the first few minutes at the scene are often crucial, and the number of victims is significantly reduced in cases where civilians intervene immediately, compared to cases where the police or specialized units arrive most often after more than 10 minutes. Now to address the likely counter-argument regarding the state's monopoly on the use of force. This does not mean, contrary to popular belief, that only the state has the right to raise a hand against someone, but rather that the state alone has the authority to administer justice and pass judgment. According to the Jedermannsrechte, everyman's rights, any citizen is permitted to detain someone who has committed a crime and whose identity cannot otherwise be established. Similarly, under the German constitution, every citizen has the right to armed resistance against anyone who attempts to overthrow our constitutional public order. Thus, everyone has the right to defend themselves, their property and others, as long as they are responding to an actual, unlawful ongoing attack with appropriate and proportional means. Addendum: while it's naturally advisable for the average citizen to cooperate during a robbery, things can be replaced, whereas people only according to macroeconomists and human resources professionals. For over 10 years, political parties have knowingly allowed conditions to deteriorate here. As the president of the Federal Hunting Association succinctly stated in his video on the petition against stricter gun laws, "We do not have a regulations problem, we have an enforcement problem." Meanwhile, the knife attack on Michael Stutzenberger starkly illustrates the difference between soldiers and police officers. A soldier can be ordered to risk their life, and many are ready to do so or serve for exactly that reason. But even a platoon of riot police officers standing nearby won't prevent an attack and will usually hesitate to intervene in a chaotic situation involving a knife. Rest in peace, Ruben, brave hero, and respect and strength to the colleague who pulled the trigger after bystander filming finally stepped out of the line of fire. Also, It is questionable whether in the midst of a crime one could realistically manage to grab their phone, dial and accurately report the crime and location. And even if they could, much can happen before the police arrive, and most crimes tend to have ended until. Let's say, why do we hear so little about terror attacks in countries like Czech Republic or Switzerland, where gun ownership is a right? It's because a potential attacker might think twice when there's a real risk that the potential victims could effectively defend themselves. Almost closing out with security theater. This term actually exists as a technical concept and is best explained through the example of the TSA, the post-9/11 airport security measures in the USA. Passengers and their luggage are screened, liquids beyond small amounts are strictly prohibited, nail scissors are sometimes confiscated, and of course the infamous practice of taking off shoes because one terrorist once hid explosives there. First, all of this is only meant to prevent methods that have already been used in previous attacks or attempts. Second, the TSA as a service operates completely inefficiently and has failed in over 90% of cases during Homeland Security tests to detect weapons or harmful substances being smuggled through. So, what we have here is a multi-million-dollar operation with immeasurable opportunity costs in terms of travelers' waiting times. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming episode on this topic, all for the sake of appearances. Because mom and pop feel safe when the show is just grand and theatrical enough.
Good morrow, sir. Now won't you step aside, for I perceive the mace your breeches high.
Alas, to wastrel villains such as I, who ne'er shall breach thy fine security.
I feel so safe.
All of this amounts to little more than publicized activism at best. Or, if you're a fan of Marx or Orwell and agree with the idea that the rifle on the worker's wall is a guarantee of freedom, it could be seen as continued good practice. After all, several nationwide social sciences experiments in the 20th century found that disarming people beforehand does indeed make it much easier to herd them into the cattle cars later on. Although Marx saw this only as a means to an end, every authoritarian regime has immediately following its consolidation of power moved to eliminate what Lenin called the useful idiots and confiscate as many weapons as possible. The idea that a homosexual couple living in a tax-beneficial partnership should have the right to defend their hemp plantation with firearms is a very actual progressive 21st century credo, one that more and more people should hopefully embrace. But in times like these, in such a detached from reality society, where young officer cadets, when being told, "Look kid, in an emergency, don't hunt wild boars with a G36, G36, it's rightfully illegal by national hunting law because it does not have enough energy to kill cleanly. It causes unnecessary suffering for the animal and risks giving away your position with a second shot or a dangerous follow-up." Then take away from that,
"He said he has weapons at home that can cause significant damage,"
and find this worth of reporting. Moving on. In conclusion, let's summarize once more. First, the harassment of law-abiding citizens is an insult and there is no statistical justification for it. Second, the assumption that criminals respect gun-free zones is naive and disproven. Third, there is absolutely no justification for further surrendering essential basic rights. Fourth, it's highly dangerous to suggest the illusion of security when our system, public spaces, and even most politicians are incredibly vulnerable. See our series on Israeli intelligence, security and leadership failures in 2023. Fifth, those who claim to be so concerned about our safety, yet won't even trust us with knives, are quite happy and content to continue to be protected by armed security, a luxury enjoyed only by the top 1%. Always remember, the first and only thing you will get from a city like Berlin after a terror attack is the bill from the corona. Thank you for your attention. This concludes my elaborations. Stay fit, stay aware, take care.